She was 34 years old, a widow, and she had $9 to her name. The bank had taken her farm that spring, and the man who signed the papers, a stern lender named Elias Cobb, had done it with a smile, calling it business, though everyone in Hollow Creek knew it was something closer to theft. All she had left fit in one trunk and one small purse, and when the county auctioned off the old rusted water tower at the edge of town, cracked and dry and condemned for 20 years, she raised her hand and bought it for $6. The crowd laughed. An old rancher leaned close and warned her plainly, "You'll regret this purchase." She almost believed him. But that night, standing beneath the tower's shadow, with a lantern trembling in her hand, she heard something impossible drift down from inside the rusted tank above her. A voice, faint and worn by time, and it spoke her name. Settle in and let us tell you the story of Clara Bishop. If you're watching this from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments, because this story is for you. Clara had grown up not far from Hollow Creek, in a modest homestead where her father, Thomas Weathers, had once been the town's waterman, the one who understood the pipes, the cisterns, the deep old wells no one else could read. He had vanished when she was 9, gone one autumn without explanation, and her mother told her only that he'd gone looking for better work out west and never sent word again. Clara grew up believing her father had simply forgotten them, but she inherited something from him nonetheless, a stubborn patience with broken things, an instinct for fixing what others threw away. She married young to a gentle farmer named Samuel Bishop, and together they built a life of quiet decency, mending fences, raising wheat, helping neighbors without asking anything in return. It was a good life, plain and honest, until the fever took Samuel 3 winters ago, and the debts he'd quietly carried came due all at once. Clara tried to hold the farm together alone. She sold her wedding china, her mother's quilts, even the mule that had pulled their plow for a decade. But Elias Cobb, who ran the only bank for 40 miles, had long wanted her land for the rail spur he hoped to sell to the county, and when her final payment came 3 days late because of a spring flood that washed out the road, he seized the opportunity like a man closing a trap. The foreclosure was legal, technically. It was also cruel. Within a week, Clara Bishop, once a respected farmer's wife, was standing at the edge of town with a single trunk, sleeping in the back room of the boarding house, and wondering how a woman who had never done wrong could end up with nothing at all. It was in that condition, desperate, humiliated, but too proud to leave the only home she'd ever known, that she wandered past the old water tower everyone called the Widow's Folly, though no one quite remembered why. It had been dry since before the war, its wooden legs silvered with age, its great iron tank rusted through in places, condemned by the county as unsafe. When she heard it was to be auctioned for scrap, something in her, some echo of her father's old patience for broken things, made her raise her hand. $6. The crowd laughed, certain she'd bought a pile of rust and regret. But that night, when she returned with a lantern to see what she'd actually purchased, she noticed a narrow door at the tower's base, half buried in weeds that no one else had ever mentioned. Inside, the air smelled of rust and dust, and something older still, oil and cedar and time. Her lantern light found a small workbench built into the tower's inner wall, tools hung with the same care her father used to hang his own. And upon that bench sat a strange brass contraption she did not recognize at first, a phonograph, its horn tarnished green, a wax cylinder still resting on its spindle as though someone had left it there only yesterday. Beside it lay a leather journal, its pages swollen with damp, but the handwriting achingly familiar. It was her father's hand. Trembling, she wound the small crank exactly as the instructions etched into the brass suggested, and set the needle down. The voice that emerged, crackling and faint, called her name. Clara, if you're hearing this, then you found your way back to me after all. It was her father's voice, recorded some 25 years before, and what followed over the next several minutes undid everything she thought she knew about her own life. Thomas Weathers had not abandoned his family for better work, as her mother believed. He had discovered, while surveying the town's water system, that the underground springs feeding Hollow Creek's wells were being secretly diverted by a young, ambitious banker's father, the elder Cobb, who controlled the land above the spring and had begun selling water rights to the railroad at extraordinary profit, quietly starving the town, own wells to force farmers into debt and desperation, then buying their land cheap when they could no longer irrigate their fields. Thomas had uncovered the scheme, drafted the true survey maps proving the spring belonged to public land, and hidden the evidence here, inside the very water tower he'd built with his own hands, believing it the safest place in town precisely because everyone considered it worthless. He had recorded his findings, hidden the original deed and survey documents in a sealed tin behind the tower's northern support beam, and made plans to bring them before the territorial court. But he never returned. The journal's final entries grew fearful, mentioning threats, mentioning a man he no longer trusted. Whether he had fled or been silenced, Clara could not say. But the truth sat waiting in that tower for 25 years, sealed like a promise, until his own daughter, cast out by the very same family's greed, came to claim it. Clara spent the following days in careful secrecy, prying loose the northern beam exactly as the recording described, until she found the tin box, rusted but intact, containing survey maps, notarized deeds, and a sworn statement proving the spring-feeding Hollow Creek belonged to the township itself, not to the Cobb family's private land as they had long claimed. It was the proof that could restore water rights and dignity to every farmer the Cobbs had quietly ruined for 2 generations. But when whispers began that the widow had found something valuable in her worthless tower, Elias Cobb came calling himself, offering to buy back the tower for triple what she'd paid, then for 10 times, growing more insistent with each refusal. When Clara made clear she intended to bring the documents before the circuit judge, Cobb turned the town against her instead, spreading word that she was unstable, grief-stricken, inventing stories to steal his family's rightful land. Old friends grew distant, shopkeepers grew cold. She stood nearly alone, save for a kind blacksmith named Walter Greer, who had known her father and quietly believed her, and who helped her carry the tin box safely to the territorial courthouse 2 counties over, riding through the night to outrun any further interference. The circuit judge examined the original survey stamps, the county seal, and Thomas Weathers' sworn testimony, and found them entirely genuine. Within a month, the ruling came down plainly. The spring and its waters belonged, and always had belonged, to Hollow Creek Township, not to the Cobb estate. Elias Cobb's fortune, built for decades on stolen water and quiet ruin, collapsed as swiftly as it had risen. Farmers who had signed away their land under his manufactured droughts came forward with their own long-held suspicions, and the county opened an inquiry into 2 decades of falsified water rights. Cobb was not hauled off in chains, for the law of that place and time was slow and imperfect, but he lost the bank, lost his standing, and lived out his years a quiet, diminished man in the town he had once ruled, a fitting, unspectacular justice, the kind that simply lets the truth stand where lies once stood. Clara did not use the restored water rights for herself alone. She petitioned the township to reopen the public wells, repaired the tower with Walter's help, and the labor of neighbors grateful to have their fields watered again, and turned the tank itself into what the town began calling Weathers' Watch, a working cistern serving every farm that had once gone dry under Cobb's schemes. She never did learn for certain what became of her father, whether he'd fled to protect them or been silenced to protect his secret. But she came to believe, standing beneath that tower each evening as the water finally ran clean and full again, that some part of him had simply been waiting, patient as ever, for the moment someone worthy would come to finish what he started. And so, the widow who bought a worthless tower for $6 became the woman who restored a town's water and its trust in one another in the same season. She was 34, once cast out with nothing but $9 in a trunk, and it was inside that same forgotten tower, dismissed by everyone as ruin, that she found not merely her father's voice calling her name, but the proof that had waited 25 years for someone patient enough to listen. That was the story of Clara Bishop, a woman who understood better than most that value is rarely where the world expects it to be. Thank you for spending this time with us and with Clara's story. If it moved you, consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that overlooked things often hold the most worth. We'd love to hear from you. What is a time you found value in something others had written off? Until next time, stay close.